So, after Joseph died and some time passes, a new pharaoh takes the throne and realizes that the Hebrew people are rapidly growing in his land. He is super intimidated by their rapid growth that he decides to have them enslaved. Even then, they are still rapidly reproducing, so then he comes out with another brilliant idea by, killing all the male babies. And he does do this. Well, except one. A mother named Jochebed sends her son down a river in a basket to avoid being murdered. The baby Moses is found by Pharaoh's daughter, and she takes him in as her own son. She even has Jochebed serve as like Moses' wet nurse for his first couple years. Eventually, though, Moses grows up as Egyptian royalty, but he is fully aware of his heritage and rejects the pleasures of Egypt in favor to be with his own suffering people. One day, he notices an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. He then murders the Egyptian and hides the body. Sometime later, Moses notices two Hebrews fighting with each other. Moses tries breaking it up, but they call him out on being a murderer. He is terrified to learn that the people know he committed this crime, so to avoid Pharaoh's wrath, he flees Egypt. And during his travel, he comes across 7 women being bullied by some shepherds. Moses drives them off. He then draws water for them and even waters their flock. He then meets their father, a priest named Jethro. He is welcomed as a part of the family for his good deed. He even marries one of Jethro's daughters, named Zipporah, and he even has a son with her. So Moses lives with Jethro and his family for about 40 years, where Moses becomes a shepherd. And one day, while Moses is taking care of the sheep, one goes astray. He goes up Mount Sinai to retrieve it, but he has an encounter with God, who comes in the form of a burning bush. Moses asks who he is, and God just says, "I am who I am." He also explains that he is the God of his ancestors. He then tells Moses that he wants to bring the Hebrews out of slavery and into a land flowing with milk and honey. He tells Moses that he's going to be his messenger to Pharaoh to let his people go. God gives Moses signs like turning his staff into a snake and clearing his hand of leprosy, but Moses makes a bunch of excuses like how he has a speech impediment or how he just doesn't want to do it, and he even begs God at one point just to send someone else. God gets angry and tells Moses that he will be with him and guide his words, and that he doesn't have to be afraid. After this encounter, Moses tells Jethro that he is off back to Egypt, and he goes with his wife and his son back to Egypt. Once he gets there, he meets his brother Aaron, who says that God sent him to meet Moses halfway. Together, they go and encounter Pharaoh and demand that the people be let go to worship God. Pharaoh's like, "Nah, man," and then he increases their workload. They try again later, but this time they show the Pharaoh the power of God by having Aaron's staff turn into snakes, and then his staff eats 2 other snakes. And so after this, then begins the plagues. So the first plague on Egypt is turning the Nile and all water in Egypt into blood, but the Pharaoh still refuses. The second plague happens, and this plague is a bunch of frogs running around Egypt, like, everywhere. The third plague is having lice get on everyone, and, the fourth plague is by having swarms of flies go everywhere in Egypt. The fifth plague is having all the livestock of Egypt be killed. The sixth plague is having everyone get affected by boils. The seventh plague is having hail rain from the sky. The eighth plague is having a bunch of locusts eat all the fields of Egypt. The ninth plague is having darkness devour the entire land, and there being no light for about 3 days. Pharaoh still stubbornly refuses, and he just won't give in. So then the 10th and final plague happened, and this plague is the death of the firstborn. And basically, an angel of death descends from heaven to destroy all the firstborn, to kill them, and the Hebrew people cover their doors with the blood of lambs, because they were told by Moses that doing so would ward off the angel of death. And so this happens, and all the Egyptian firstborn sons and daughters are killed. Finally, the Pharaoh gives in, and the Hebrew people, after 400 years of slavery, are finally free, and they celebrate the Passover. They then carry the remains of Joseph and leave Egypt with many riches because the Egyptians wanted them out so bad, they just gave them riches to leave quicker. While they are leaving, Pharaoh changes his mind and then sends his army to get them back. The people are stuck between the Red Sea and the Pharaoh's army, but a giant pillar of fire comes out from the sky and holds off the Egyptian host. Then Moses puts his staff in the ocean, and God splits the sea in half for them to cross. They do, and the Egyptian army, after a while, make it past the pillar of fire. As they are gaining to get the Hebrews, God closes the sea and drowns the whole army. At last the Hebrew people are free, and they celebrate God. They then make their journey to the Promised Land and live happily ever after. Or do they? Dun dun dun.